Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are doing something a little different. We aren't just looking at a company, we are looking at a specific feeling.
Oh,
You know
okay.
that feeling when you hold a piece of technology and it disappears. It stops being a gadget and it becomes an extension of your brain.
The flow state, yeah. It's incredibly rare.
It is so rare, and I want to take you back to a time before we were all doom scrolling on these glass rectangles for 6, 7 hours a day. I want to go back to the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
the era of the stylus, the era of the little electronic beep.
The era of graffiti? And just to be clear for everyone, I don't mean spray painting subway
No,
cars.
not at all. We are talking about Palm. And look, if you're under a certain age, you might see that little orange logo on your LG Smart TV and just think, what is that?
Right, or you saw that weird tiny phone from a few years back.
Exactly, that little credit card sized thing.
Yeah.
But if you were around in the mid-90s, the PalmPilot wasn't just another gadget. It was the icon.
It was everything.
It was the iPhone before the iPhone even existed. It was the device that proved to the world that we actually wanted computers in our pockets.
You know, it's almost impossible to overstate the cultural gravity of Palm back then. They didn't just make a successful product, they literally defined the category of mobile computing for an entire decade.
For sure.
But the story we have in front of us today, and this is all drawn from the really comprehensive history of Palm Inc., spanning from, its founding in 92 all the way to its weird zombie-like existence today. It's about so much more than just nostalgia.
Oh, it's a sign.
It's a business thriller, it's a tragedy, in some parts it's a comedy of errors.
I was reading through the source material for this, and honestly, it reads like a script for a prestige TV drama. You have this scrappy origin story in Silicon Valley.
Classic.
You have a meteoric rise during the dot-com bubble. I mean, we are talking about an IPO where the stock hit nearly $100 a share on day one.
Which is just insane to even think about.
And then, as is tradition in tech, the inevitable crushing crash.
A brutal crash.
Yeah.
But it's not just the stock price, is it?
No, that's what makes it so fascinating. It's the infighting. You have these confusing corporate splits where the company basically divorces itself.
Right.
You get mergers that feel like these really awkward family reunions. And then you have this truly tragic ending with HP and a fire sale where they were selling their flagship tablet for $99 just to get them out the door.
That $99 touchpad sale is, it's a moment that's just etched into the memory of every tech enthusiast from that era. But you're right, to really get it, you have to look at the entire arc.
A whole story.
We have to look at the product lines, the Trio, which basically invented the modern smartphone, the Pre, which was supposed to save the company, even the Xire.
Don't forget the Xire.
And we have to dig into the corporate maneuvering, the stuff with 3Com and Handspring. And through it all, we have to answer this fundamental question. How does a company that has the absolute best technology, and spoiler alert, near the end, they really did have the best mobile OS, how do they fail to survive?
That is the $1.2 billion question, isn't it? So let's set the stage. It's 1992. The internet is barely a thing for normal people.
Not at all. It's for academics and the military, mostly.
Right. And if you have appointments, you're writing them in a paper planner, a day timer, a Filofax.
Thick, leather-bound, heavy.
Yeah,
If you lost that thing, your professional life was basically over.
exactly. And into this very analog world steps a trio that we should probably call the trinity of handheld computing. You have Jeff Hawkins, the founder, the real visionary,
The brain.
the brain, Donna Dubinsky, who is the business muscle, and Ed Colligan, the marketing genius. These three, Hawkins, Dubinsky, Colligan, they are the main characters of this entire saga.
They really are. And Jeff Hawkins is such a fascinating character. He's not your typical swaggering tech CEO. He's an inventor, almost an academic, and he was obsessed with neuroscience, with how the human brain works.
I read that he actually carried a block of wood in his shirt pocket for months.
He did, just to get the size and feel of his ideal device right before they'd even built it.
So he founds Palm Computing in 1992, but, and this is a key detail I found in the notes, they don't start by making the PalmPilot. That wasn't the first thing.
No, not even close.
Yeah.
Their first attempt was something called the Zoomer.
Even the name sounds like it's trying way too hard to be cool in the 90s, the Zoomer.
It really does. It sounds like a bad Saturday morning cartoon character, but the Zoomer is so important because it was a complete and utter disaster.
Okay, so break it down. What was it?
It was a consumer PDA, a personal digital assistant, but Palm didn't make the hardware. Casio did.
The watch company.
The watch and calculator company, yeah. Casio made the device, and it was distributed by Tandy, which owned Radio Shack.
Oh, Radio Shack. Okay.
And the operating system, the core software, was provided by a company called GeoWorks. Palm's role, they were just hired to run the PM software.
PMM, that's the personal information management. So the calendar, the address book, the to-do list.
That's it. So just think about that structure for a second. You have Casio making the hardware in Japan. You have Pandy trying to sell it in American malls. You have GeoWorks doing the underlying OS. And then you have this tiny company, Palm, doing the main apps on top of all of that.
That sounds like a classic too many cooks in the kitchen scenario. I mean, who is actually in charge of the user experience there?
Nobody.
Yeah.
And everybody. And that was precisely the problem. The device was slow, it was clunky, and the handwriting recognition, which was supposed to be the killer feature, it was terrible.
Why was it so bad?
It tried to recognize your natural cursive handwriting. But the processors back then, they just couldn't handle the variance. So you'd write lunch with Bob, and the Zoomer would interpret it as launch with Blob or something equally useless. It was unusable.
So the Zoomer hits the shelves and it just flops hard.
It didn't just flop. It was a commercial catastrophe. And this is the moment where most startups just die. Right. You launch your one product, nobody buys it, you run out of cash, you close the doors. But Palm didn't go under.
Because they pivoted. And this is where the story gets really interesting to me. Hawkins looks at the wreckage of the Zoomer and realizes they have to completely change tactics. But they didn't have money to build a new device yet.
Not at all. So they looked at what assets they actually had. They realized that while the Zoomer itself was a failure, the synchronization software they wrote, the code that let the device talk to a PC, that part was actually really solid.
Ah, the sync.
The sync. So they started selling that as a standalone product called Palm Connect to other companies, like HP, for their devices. It kept the lights on.
But the real breakthrough, the big idea, came from analyzing why the Zoomer failed. It wasn't just that the hardware was slow, it was the input method.
Correct. Hawkins had this incredible epiphany. He realized that trying to teach a computer to read messy, complicated human handwriting was a fool's errand. The technology just wasn't there yet. So he completely flipped the problem on its head.
Okay.
He thought, why don't we teach humans how to write in a simple way that the computer can easily understand?
And that is the birth of graffiti.
Graffiti. It's absolutely iconic.
For the listeners who are too young to remember this, we really have to explain how weird and brilliant this was. You didn't just write anywhere on the screen. There was a specific little box at the bottom of the display.
Right, the silk-screened area. One side for letters, one for numbers.
And you had to learn a new alphabet. It wasn't hard, but it was specific. It was a new way of writing.
It was a system of unistrokes. Single, continuous strokes for each letter. Think about a capital A. Normally, that's 3 separate strokes. You go slant up, slant down, then the crossbar.
Right.
In graffiti, the letter A was just upside down V, one continuous stroke. The letter F was like a backwards upside down L. By stripping away all the complexity, the computer could recognize the text instantly and with near 100% accuracy.
It sounds like it would be a huge hassle asking the user to basically learn a new language just to use their calendar. But people did it. I remember practicing my graffiti strokes. It felt like learning a secret code or something.
It did. And because it was so reliable, you could get really fast. You could take notes in a meeting without even looking down at the device. It was a true aha moment for human-computer interaction.
And they actually licensed the software out first, didn't they?
They did. They sold graffiti to Apple for the Apple Newton message pad.
Which is just deeply ironic considering the Newton was the big, expensive, over-engineered competitor that Palm eventually crushed.
Completely. But the software wasn't enough. Hawkins knew that if they stayed a software-only company, they would always be at the mercy of hardware partners who didn't get it.
Like Casio with the Zoomer.
Exactly. That's the critical insight from the Zoomer failure. Hawkins, Dubinsky, and Colligan realized that if you want the product to be great, you have to control the whole widget. You can't just write codes for some brick that another company designed. You have to build the hardware and the software together so they sing in perfect harmony.
But building hardware is insanely expensive. You need factories, supply chains, distribution. They were a tiny software startup in Los Altos. They needed a sugar daddy.
Enter U.S. Robotics.
Now, when I hear U.S. Robotics, I immediately think of that Will Smith movie, I, Robot. But in the 90s, they were the absolute kings of modems.
That 56K dial-up screech, that iconic sound, that was U.S. Robotics. They were a massive connectivity company, and in 1995, they acquired Palm.
So that gave Hawkins the money he needed.
It gave the funding and the manufacturing expertise to finally build his dream device.
And then, because the 90s were just a wild time for corporate mergers and acquisitions, U.S. Robotics itself gets bought by 3Com in 1997.
Right. So suddenly, this little startup, Palm, is now a tiny division inside a massive enterprise networking giant.
Which seems like a weird fit.
A very weird fit culturally, but it provided the financial stability they needed to launch the product that changed everything. The PalmPilot.
The Pilot 1000 and the Pilot 5000. Let's talk about these devices. They seem so primitive now. They didn't have color screens. They didn't play music. They didn't connect to the internet. Why did people go absolutely crazy for them?
Because they respected the user's time. That was the core philosophy. Hawkins wanted it to be a companion to your PC, not a replacement. It was designed to do a few things and do them instantly and perfectly.
And the hot sync button. We have to talk about the button.
The cradle. The cradle was genius. You'd get home from work, you'd put the Pilot in this little plastic cradle connected to your PC, you'd press one physical button.
And you'd hear that little bloop bloop sound.
That sound, and everything matched. Your calendar on your desktop was now in your pocket, your contacts were updated.
Yeah.
It sounds so trivial today where everything is just magically in the cloud, but in 1996, that was pure magic. It just worked every single time.
And the battery life, it ran on 2 AAA batteries, regular batteries you could buy at any drugstore.
And they lasted for weeks. Not hours, not days, weeks. It was also instant on. You tap the screen, and boom, your address book was there. There was no boot up sequence. It was literally faster than finding a page in a paper planner.
It was a status symbol, too. I remember when the Palm V came out a bit later, that anodized aluminum chassis.
Oh, the Palm V was gorgeous.
It was so sleek. It was cold to the touch. It didn't feel like a toy. It felt like a piece of high-end jewelry.
The Palm V was absolutely the peak of that design era. It was beautiful. But here's the crazy part. While consumers were falling in love with these devices, the Trinity Hawkins, Dubinsky, Colligan, they were completely miserable inside the company.
They were winning. They had over 60% market share. They were absolutely crushing Microsoft's Windows CE devices.
They were winning, but they felt like they were suffocating inside 3Com. 3Com was a big, boring infrastructure company. They cared about selling Ethernet switches and routers to corporations. They just didn't understand consumer electronics. They treated Palm like this weird, quirky side project. They wouldn't give Palm the resources or the independence it needed to grow as fast as the market demanded.
So it all came to a head, a confrontation.
A big one. Dubinsky and Hawkins basically went to the 3Com board and laid it all out. They said, spin us off. Let us be our own independent company. And 3Com flat out said no.
So they walked.
In June of 1998, the founders, the people who invented the product, the soul of the company, they just stood up and walked right out the door.
That is a boss move. But they didn't just retire to a beach in Hawaii. They did something incredibly aggressive.
Oh, yeah. They immediately started a direct competitor, a company called Handspring. This is such a crucial chapter that often gets glossed over. They basically said, we're going to build a better Palm than Palm.
I loved the Handspring devices. They had those translucent colored plastic cases, kind of like the iMacs of the time. You could get them in blue or orange or graphite.
Totally. They were fun.
But the big innovation wasn't the color. It was that slot on the back.
The springboard expansion slot. This was absolutely brilliant. The Handspring visor had this big slot on the back where you could just plug in these hardware modules.
And you could get anything. You could plug in a GPS receiver module.
You could plug in a primitive digital camera module. You could plug in an MP3 player module.
I swear I remember seeing a module that was a massager, like a little vibrating massager that was powered by your PDA.
There were definitely some weird ones. But the most important module, the one that pointed to the future, was a cellular radio. They made a module called the Visor phone.
Right.
You plugged it into the back of your PDA, and boom, the whole thing became a phone. That was the seed of the modern smartphone era right there.
So let's just pause for a second and look at the landscape. You have the original founders over at Handspring innovating like crazy with these modules, and you have Palm still stuck inside 3Com, just kind of churning out slight iterations of the old Pilot design. 3Com must have been kicking themselves.
Well, if they weren't, the market was kicking them. Investors looked at 3Com and said, why are you holding on to this diamond?
Yeah.
This is the hottest thing in tech. The dot-com bubble is inflating like crazy. Tech stocks are going bananas. Everyone wanted a piece of Palm.
So 3Com finally caved.
They had no choice. On March 1st, 2000, they spun Palm off as its own independent, publicly traded company.
March 1st, 2000, I feel like I know where this is going. That date is, that is etched in financial history. That is literally the peak of the dot-com bubble.
The absolute tippy top of the peak.
Ah.
And the IPO. It was pure madness. It was mania. On the first day of trading, Palm shares, ticker symbol PalmLM, hit an all-time high of $95.06.
$95 a share for a company making electronic calendars.
To put that into perspective for you, at that exact moment, Palm the spinoff was worth more than 3Com, its own parent company.
That makes no sense.
It gets crazier. For a brief moment, Palm was worth more than General Motors. A company making little plastic organizers was valued higher than a company making millions of cars and trucks.
That is the very definition of irrational exuberance. I remember reading that people were actually buying shares of 3Com just to get the Palm shares that were being distributed and then immediately dumping the 3Com stock. It created this bizarre negative value for the parent company.
It did. It completely distorted the market. But, gravity always wins. The bubble burst, the NASDAQ crashed, and because Palm was the poster child for this new mobile tech bubble, it got hammered the hardest.
How bad was the fall?
It was a complete free fall. Within just over a year, they lost 90% of their value. 90%. By June of 2001, that $95 stock was trading at $6.50.
Ouch! That is legitimate financial whiplash. You go from being one of the most valuable companies in the world to basically a penny stock in 15 months.
They were the worst performing PDA manufacturer on the NASDAQ.
And right in the middle of this crash, the leadership at Palm, remember, the founders are gone, they're at Handspring. They make a strategic decision that, in hindsight, I think sealed their fate.
The great split.
They decided to chop the company right in half.
Right. In 2002, they made the call to separate the hardware business from the operating system business. They created a new company called PalmSource to make and license the OS, and the original hardware company was eventually renamed PalmOwn.
Okay, let's really unpack this. Why on earth would you do that? The entire lesson of the Zoomer was that you need to control both sides of the experience. Why would they voluntarily unintegrate themselves?
It was pure Microsoft envy. You have to look at the world in 2002. Who was the biggest, richest, most powerful tech company on earth?
Microsoft.
Microsoft. And what was their business model? They made the operating system, Windows. They licensed it to everyone. Dell, HP, Compaq, Gateway. They didn't make the computers. They just collected the rent on the software.
So Palm's executives looked at that and thought, we want to be the Microsoft of mobile. They wanted Sony and Samsung and Kyocera and even Handspring to pay them a licensing fee to use the Palm OS.
Exactly. They thought the real money, the high margins, were in the software licensing, not in what they saw as the low-margin hardware business. It was a logical thought process for the time, but it was a fatal strategic error.
Because it created a massive conflict of interest, right?
It's a huge conflict. PalmSource, the software team, was legally obligated to treat PalmOwn, the hardware team, just like any other customer. They couldn't share roadmaps. They couldn't coordinate closely on new features. They were legally separate entities. It slowed everything down to an absolute crawl.
It's like if Ford split into an engine company and a car body company, and they were forbidden from talking to each other. You'd end up with engines that don't fit in the cars.
That is a perfect analogy. That is exactly what started to happen. Innovation just stagnated. Meanwhile, while Palm was busy fighting with itself, the founders over at Handspring were struggling too.
Why? They had great products.
They had great products, but they just didn't have the scale to survive the brutal dot-com crash. They were running out of money.
So in a twist fit for a soap opera, the two halves decide to get back together.
The reunion. In October of 2003, PalmOwn, the hardware company, acquires Handspring. And in doing so, it brings Jeff Hawkins, Donna Dubinsky, and Ed Colligan back into the fold.
The Trinity returns.
They return, and they don't come empty-handed. They bring a gift. Handspring had been working on a new type of device that would define the next 5 years of mobile computing.
The Trio.
The Trio, specifically the Trio 600.
Now we are entering the modern era. I had a Trio 650. I loved that little brick.
The Trio 600 was a complete revelation. Before that device, smartphones were these weird, clunky Frankenstein devices. They were either a phone with a terrible tiny screen or a PDA with a clunky radio bolted onto the side.
Right.
The Trio was the first device to integrate them perfectly. It was a great PDA. There was also a great phone.
It had that little stubby antenna, which seems so retro now. And it had that full QWERTY keyboard with the smile layout.
The smile layout. The keys were curved slightly upward at the edges to mimic the natural arc of your thumbs. It made typing on that tiny keyboard incredibly fast and accurate.
And it had a physical switch on the top to silence the ringer.
Which the iPhone totally stole, by the way.
100%.
Yeah.
The Trio 600 and the 650 that followed were the absolute gold standard. For a few years there, from about 2003 to 2006, if you were a business person, a lawyer, a real estate agent, a techie, you had a Trio on your hip.
It was a BlackBerry killer before BlackBerry really took over the corporate world.
But there was a ticking time bomb buried inside that Trio, the operating system.
Right. Remember the split? Palm bought Handspring, but they didn't buy back the software company, PalmSource. PalmSource was still out there, an independent company, just drifting.
Okay.
And then in 2005, PalmSource got acquired by a Japanese company called Access S.
So wait a minute, the operating system that runs the Trio, the very heart and soul of the device, is now owned by a completely different company in Japan that has no real strategic interest in making sure the Trio succeeds.
Precisely. And not only that, but the OS was getting really old. It was built on code from 1996. It didn't support proper multitasking. It didn't support modern networking protocols well. The whole thing was being held together with digital duct tape.
And the hardware company, which was now just called Palm again, they knew this. They were desperate. They needed a modern OS to compete.
Desperate is the right word.
And this leads to what I personally consider the biggest betrayal in the entire story.
The Trio 700W.
The W stands for Windows.
It still hurts, just to say it out loud.
Oh.
In January 2006, Palm released a Trio that was running Microsoft Windows Mobile.
I remember watching the keynote address online. They brought Bill Gates out on stage with the Palm CEO. It felt like watching Luke Skywalker join the Empire. It was just wrong. Why did they do it?
It was pure desperation. Verizon, which was a huge carrier partner, demanded it. Corporate IT departments were demanding it because they loved Microsoft Exchange Server. And Palm didn't have their own next-generation OS ready yet.
So they had to do something to stop the bleeding.
They did. But it signaled to the world, to their most loyal fans, that Palm had lost its soul. They were now just another hardware company pushing Microsoft's clunky software.
But secretly, steep in the labs in Sunnyvale, they were cooking something up. They knew Windows wasn't the answer. They knew the old Palm OS was dead. They needed a Hail Mary pass.
Enter John Rubinstein.
The Podfather.
The Podfather himself. John Rubinstein was the legendary hardware engineering executive at Apple who led the team that created the iPod. He left Apple, and in 2007, he joined Palm as executive chairman. And he brought a lot of that Apple DNA with him.
He came in, looked at the absolute mess at Palm, and basically said, we need to burn the ships. We are starting over. We're building a brand new operating system from scratch.
And that incredibly ambitious project became webOS.
This is the part of the story that just breaks my heart every time I think about it. webOS. It was. It was magnificent.
It was so far ahead of its time, truly. They unveiled it at the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, in January 2009, along with the first phone to run it, the Palm Pre. And the audience, which was full of jaded tech journalists, just gasped.
I remember the Riverstone design. The phone was this smooth, black, curved pebble. It felt organic in your hand. But the software, let's talk about the cards metaphor.
This was the genius of Matias Duarte, who was the design lead they hired away from Danger, the company that made the Sidekick.
Right.
At the time, on the iPhone, multitasking didn't exist. If you pressed the home button, the app you were in just closed. You could only do one thing at a time. On webOS, every app was a card.
Like a playing card.
Exactly. You could have your email open as a card, a web page open as another card, and your maps open as a third. You could swipe through them like a deck of cards. And to close an app, you just flick the card up and off the screen.
Which is exactly how the iPhone and Android work today. It took Apple and Google years to copy that interface.
Years! And they had Synergy. That was another killer feature. webOS automatically pulled your contacts from Google, from Facebook, from LinkedIn, and it merged them all into one single profile for each person. Nobody else was doing that in 2009.
The hype for the Palm Pre was completely off the charts. The stock shot up from $3 to over $18. Everyone thought they did it. They're back. Palm saved the company. But then the launch happened.
June 6, 2009. The fatal flaw wasn't the software. The software was incredible. It was the business strategy.
Yes.
They launched exclusively with one U.S. carrier, Sprint.
Sprint. I mean, can you hear me now? Guy was Verizon. AT&T had the exclusive on the iPhone. Sprint was the distant, struggling third-place carrier.
It was a suicide pact. It was an absolutely catastrophic decision. If you wanted this amazing new phone, you had to switch your whole family over to Sprint. And in 2009, nobody wanted to switch to Sprint. The network just wasn't great.
And on top of that, the hardware build quality of the Pre itself was suspect.
It was. There was something people called the Oreo effect.
Right, the slider mechanism.
Exactly. The phone was a vertical slider with a keyboard, but the mechanism was wobbly. If you twisted the phone in your hands, it felt like an Oreo cookie sliding apart. The plastic felt cheap. The keys on the keyboard were these tiny, sharp little things. People reported they actually cut their fingers.
So it just felt cheap compared to the solid glass and steel of the iPhone 3GS, which came out at the same time.
It did. So you have this beautiful, futuristic software trapped in a mediocre hardware body, locked to a struggling carrier.
And they just ran out of time and money.
Completely. They burned through all their cash reserves marketing the Pre. The sales were just okay, but nowhere near iPhone numbers. By early 2010, the stock was back in the toilet. They were dead in the water and bleeding cash.
They needed a buyer. They needed a white knight to ride in and save them. And who rides in? Hewlett-Packard.
HP, the titan of Silicon Valley. In April of 2010, HP announced they were buying Palm for $1.2 billion in cash.
And at the time, this actually made a lot of sense to people. HP was the world's biggest PC maker. They had infinite money. They had global distribution channels. And they said all the right things. They said, we aren't just buying a phone company. We are buying webOS to put it on everything.
That was the scale argument. The CEO of HP at the time, Mark Hurd, said, we're going to put webOS on phones, on tablets, on netbooks, maybe even on our printers. They wanted to create a huge, unified ecosystem that could legitimately rival Apple's iOS. It was a bold vision.
So we wait. A year goes by, 2011 arrives, and HP finally launches the new lineup of webOS devices, the Pre-3 phone, the tiny HP Veer phone, and the big one, the HP touchpad.
The touchpad was supposed to be the iPad killer. It was the first and only tablet to ever run webOS.
And it thudded.
It landed with a dull, sickening thud. The hardware was just not good. It was chunky, made of this thick, glossy black plastic that was a fingerprint magnet. It was heavy, and the App Store was a ghost town.
Right. No apps.
All the developers were busy making apps for iOS and Android, which had millions of users. They didn't have the time or the resources to write apps for a third platform that had almost no users yet.
The sales were abysmal. I read a story that Best Buy was reportedly refusing to pay HP for their inventory because the touchpads were just piling up in the warehouse, unsold.
And this brings us to the villain of our story, or at least the executioner, a man named Leo Apotheker.
He'd taken over as the CEO of HP. He was a software guy from a German company called SAP. He never seemed to care about hardware at all.
He looked at the balance sheet. He saw the touchpad division losing money, and he had zero patience for it. On August 18th, 2011, and you have to get this timing, literally 49 days after the touchpad launched, he pulled the plug.
49 days. That is just insane. Most companies will give a new product a year, maybe 2, to find its footing and build an audience. He killed it in 7 weeks.
Immediate termination. He went on an earnings call and announced that HP was stopping all production and sales of all webOS devices effective immediately. He basically lit $1.2 billion on fire right in front of the shareholders.
But then the weirdest thing happened. The fire sale.
Because they had all these warehouses full of these now dead tablets, HP announced they were dropping the price from $499 to just $99 to liquidate the remaining stock.
And complete pandemonium broke out.
I have never seen anything like it. People were literally camping out at Best Buy. Retail websites crashed under the load. For a week, the HP touchpad became the #1 selling tablet on Amazon, outselling the iPad, but only after it was canceled.
It proved that people actually liked the device and the software. They just didn't like it at the Apple price point.
It was such a bitter, tragic irony for the webOS engineering team. Suddenly, millions of people were using their software and loving it, right as they were all getting their pink slips.
And we should mention the community that sprung up here. The homebrew scene for the touchpad was legendary.
Oh, the community was incredible. Because HP had abandoned the device, the users took it over, they hacked the touchpad to run Android on it, they kept the webOS activation servers alive for years through their own efforts. There are people today who still have a working touchpad in a drawer somewhere, running some custom build of Android. It generated so much love, but the corporate suits just didn't care.
And Leo Apotheker, the CEO who made this call, he got fired shortly after that, right?
He lasted less than a year as CEO. He destroyed Palm. He oversaw a disastrous acquisition of a software company called Autonomy that turned out to be a massive fraud. He tanked HP's stock by 45%, and he got the boot. Meg Whitman came in to clean up the mess, but Palm was already dead and buried.
So let's look at the afterlife. The body parts of Palm were scattered to the winds after HP was done with them.
They were. webOS, the software, went on a very strange journey. HP eventually sold the team and the source code to LG Electronics in 2013.
Which is why, if you go to a store today and you buy a high-end LG OLED TV, the smart TV interface it's running is webOS. You're using the great-grandchild of the Palm Pre to watch Netflix.
And it's actually a great TV interface. Those cards and the fluid navigation work really well on a big screen.
So that's the software. What about the brand, the name Palm and that little orange logo?
That was sold off separately to a shelf company that was tied to TCL. TCL is a huge Chinese electronics manufacturer. They make TVs, and they also make phones for other brands like Alcatel and, for a while, BlackBerry.
And they tried to resurrect the Palm brand in 2018 with that tiny little phone, the Palm phone.
That was such a weird device. It was the size of a credit card. It ran a modified version of Android. But the marketing pitch was what was so fascinating. They didn't market it as your main phone.
No, it was a companion to your big phone, a phone for your phone.
Right. The idea was that you'd leave your big, distracting iPhone at home, you'd take this tiny Palm out to dinner with you, and you wouldn't be tempted to scroll through Instagram because the screen was just too small.
It was trying to solve the problem that the original PalmPilot solved, digital complexity, but it was just too niche. And it was exclusive to Verizon. They repeated the Sprint mistake again, and it required its own separate monthly fee. It flopped. It really seems like Palm was always cursed to be either way too early to a market or just slightly wrong on the final execution.
That's the recurring theme throughout this whole saga, isn't it?
Yeah.
They basically invented the PDA before the world was quite ready for it. They refined the smartphone right before the iPhone came and perfected it. They even tried to do a digital well-being phone years before people really started hating social media.
Yeah.
They were the Cassandras of tech. They could see the future, but they could never quite capitalize on it.
So we've gone from the Zoomer to the Pilot, through the mania of the IPO, the absolute stupidity of the split, the brilliance of the Trio, the tragedy of the Pre, and now these zombie years. If we have to distill this whole epic story down to one key lesson for the listener, maybe for someone running a business today, what is it?
I think the single biggest lesson is about the danger of disintegration. That great split back in 2002 is the moment that I think put Palm on the path to ruin. You cannot separate the soul of the product, which is the software, from the body of the product, which is the hardware.
Not if you want to make something truly great.
Exactly. Apple understood this. Steve Jobs was famously pathologically obsessed with controlling the whole widget. Palm had that model, and then they voluntarily gave it up because they were trying to be Microsoft in a world that was rapidly moving toward Apple's integrated model. It was a fundamental misreading of where the industry was going.
It's the difference between a product designed by a committee and a product designed by a singular, coherent vision.
That's it. When the Trinity was there, Hawkins, Dubinsky, Colligan, they had that singular vision. Simple, fast, fits in your pocket. When they left, and after the split, that vision got diluted by committees, by licensing deals, by carrier requirements, by corporate politics. The soul left the building long before HP finally shut the lights off.
It's a sad story, but in a weird way, it's also an inspiring one. Because every time you swipe up to close an app on your iPhone or you see your contacts merge on Android, you are using a little piece of Palm's DNA.
They may be gone, but they are absolutely not forgotten. Their influence is everywhere.
And on that note, I think I'm going to go onto eBay and see if I can find a working Palm V for my desk. I miss that green backlight.
Just don't try to connect it to your Wi-Fi. It probably won't end well.
Fair enough. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
Catch you in the next one.